I am delighted to welcome Dr. Christina Grant, the State Superintendent of the Office of the State Superintendent of Education in Washington, D.C., and a distinguished Hofstra alum, to deliver the 2023 Lives in Public Policy and Public Service Address today. Welcome, Dr. Grant. Christina, if I may, my former student.
Thank you, Dr. Bullis. I still can't call you Mina, so I'm going to stick with Dr. Bullis. It's
Well,
really good to see you.
It is wonderful to see you. And as we were just saying earlier, I honestly don't know where the years go. It seems like just the other day that we were actually both starting at Hofstra when I started teaching and you started as an undergrad. Let me allow me to give a few words of introduction about what this speech is and introduce you, and then we can have a conversation about the future of public education in the 21st century, as well as your journey in public policy and public service. As I have mentioned to you, the Lives in Public Policy and Public Service speaker series was launched in 2016 by Hofstra's Kalikow School faculty. This was shortly after the Kalikow School was created. It is composed of 8 departments: anthropology, economics, global studies and geography, history, philosophy, political science, religion, and sociology. And the purpose of the Kalikow School was to bring together interdisciplinary study of the social sciences with a clear connection to public policy and public service. The 8 departments created the public policy and public service major, as well as this series to bring together distinguished public leaders to campus to share their personal journey in pursuing a career in public service and the special challenges and achievements that they have experienced. The lecture series is designed to encourage and motivate Hofstra students to pursue their own passion for public service. Whether they major in one of the Kalikow School departments or our PPPS major, they are uniformly keen to participate in the public sphere, whether through elected office, political appointment, or outside organizations that influence public policy making. Dr. Grant, Christina, your career encompasses all of these areas. And I could take up the whole hour with your listing your accomplishments, but you'll forgive me for doing a very abbreviated version of your biography. And then I hope we'll have a chance to elaborate more in our conversation. We remember you graduating, I remember, in the class of 2000 with a double major in political science and African American studies. You had a highly distinguished career at Hofstra. I know I can speak personally to your work as a peer teacher in my American presidency course, as a participant, a student guide in the George H.W. Bush Conference in your first year. That was in April of 1997. As a student representing Hofstra in the American Political Science Association's Ralph Bunche Summer Program Research Institute, where you presented your research at, I believe it was the 1999 annual meeting of the American Political Science Association. If I recall correctly, I think you were a resident assistant at Hofstra. Is that right?
I was.
I actually have very fond memories of you discussing as a peer teacher your leadership experiences at Hofstra, and and that just came to mind. And I know I've left out others, but after leaving Hofstra, you went on to join Teach for America, where I believe you taught in Harlem. During your time at TFA, you went on to earn 2 master's degrees, one from Fordham University in teaching and adolescent learning, and then a master's degree from Teachers College of Columbia in organizational leadership. You then also earned your doctorate in education, focusing on organizational leadership from the University of Pennsylvania. You have worked for government and for education organizations, including, if I believe I have this correctly, the New York City Department of Education in their charter school office, where I believe you became deputy executive director. The executive director of the New York Campaign for Achievement Now organization, superintendent of the Great Oaks Foundation, which was a charter management organization that opened schools in high-need communities. the Chief of Charters and Innovations for the School District of Philadelphia. You are in the fifth cohort of Future Chiefs for Change in the Leadership Development Program. And before I get to your current position, I wanted to note here that in your role as counselor, or excuse me, as in Philadelphia, you were responsible for multiple areas of engagement and oversight and accountability. And then, of course, most currently, your position as a state superintendent in the Office of Education in Washington, D.C., where I know that your focus and commitment is to new school methods and instruction and diversity and inclusion in education. I think I've left out far too much, but we want to hear you speak as well. So let me begin by just giving you a warm welcome, Dr. Grant. We are delighted to welcome you to Hofstra on Zoom today, and look forward to doing that in person when your schedule permits. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's surreal to be with you virtually. We have our performance oversight hearings this week in government, and so very, very hard time, but really am thrilled and somewhat humbled to be here today. Seeing you, Dr. Bose, brings me, I feel like I am 21, trying to finish my thesis so that I can graduate on it. Like, that brings it all back. And so much of who I am today and how I work is grounded in your teaching and your guidance and your leadership. And so I am very humbled to be engaged in this conversation, to even think at 21 that I'd ever be called a distinguished alum. There's so much love for Hofstra and what it means, especially for someone like me. I'm from Hempstead, Long Island. And that's a thought that most people don't know or understand or appreciate, but to have graduated from Hempstead High School and literally walk to campus and see how far that walk can take you. It really does start with professors like you, that you could have told a lot of other stories about late papers and missed assignments. So thank you for sparing me. Thank you for sparing and just saying the highlights. But I tell people often that Hofstra University is the foundation. And it's interesting that the universities along the way take a lot of credit. And I'm always like, no, but my undergraduate degree is from Hofstra, and the training, the political science training at Hofstra has served me extremely well throughout my career. And I think we're going to talk more about that now, but I'm just thrilled to see you and to be in this space. It's a full circle moment. I'm happy I'm on Zoom, because if I were in person, I'd probably cry, and that wouldn't be helpful.
Well, you and me both, because I can feel myself tearing up a little. So I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah.
And actually, I was going to start with where you are now, but just your beautiful statement about coming back to Hofstra on Zoom now and in person soon makes me, I wonder if we could actually start at the beginning for you. And if you could tell a little bit about how you came from Hempstead High School to decide to study at Hofstra.
It's such a great question, because it sits at the intersection of a lot of education policies that I champion today. My journey at Hofstra actually started when I was a junior in high school. I was a participant in a program that had dual enrollment. And so Hofstra was a university that allowed high school students to take college level coursework and essentially be dual enrolled. And for me, in 11th grade, I did not appreciate the significance of what it meant to leave my high school, come on a university campus, interact and interface with undergraduate students, and be guided by peer counselors along the way. I very much just saw it as a part of school. And so when I fast forward to today and I approve all of the dual enrollment programs of the district, it's that moment where in my junior year, walking the campus, Hofstra was not a foreign thing to me. It was very much a part of who I was long before I was a college student. And then I remember, I tell my father this story often. When I was 10, we were driving under the Unispan. I hope it's still called the Unispan, but that's what it was called when I went to school. And he had looked up and he was like, you're going to go to college here. And at 10 years old, I was like, how, sir? Like, it seems so far and so like distant. Like, how could you? I'm a first generation college graduate. And so I was like, how do we get here? And it was those two things that started the journey. One, my parent telling me that I would go to college and that's the college I would go to. And then two, having access to the university, the professors, the campus, before it was a high stakes decision. So I was fortunate to start undergrad with somewhere between 16 and 20 credits that were in a range of topics. I had not declared a major. But I remember in the middle of my senior year, I had applied to a bunch of schools. I applied to Yale and Temple and all those places. And literally sitting on campus, I filled out my application to go to Hofstra. And then one day walked over to admissions and just like said, like, hey, I haven't heard, have I gotten in? And was told that I had gotten in. And then the story continues because I received the Hempstead for Hofstra, Hofstra for Hempstead scholarship, which was a scholarship program designed for students who had graduated from my high school. And so when it was time to make the ultimate decision, I'd already had professors that knew and cared about me. I knew what the Office of Freshman Advancement was. I understood how to navigate. I knew what the bookstore was, right? I knew how to find food, like things that now as I orchestrate high school students into their college selection process, I didn't appreciate how important it was that all those things were already clear to me when I was in high school. And so in a lot of respects, it was a no-brainer decision to choose Hofstra. But then I circled back to that same father who had to write tuition checks. And, you know, at 18, he had said, no, I told you you were going to Hofstra. So it doesn't matter that you got into these other schools. This is where you're going to go to school. And then the journey to choose political science literally started in Political Science 101. I want to say Dr. Parati was my professor.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'll never forget the moment. I had joined Hofstra planning to be an engineering major, was not doing it well at all in chemistry, like at all. And I remember that class, we had done some assignment on Plato and I'd written a response and she was like, your ability to understand this is very strong and you can think critically about these types of topics. Have you ever thought about majoring in political science? And, you know, if you look at my high school report cards, you'll see that I'm very talkative and I like to debate and lots of suggestions on me going to law school. And it all kind of came together my freshman year. And then, you know, professors like you and others, I really took my major to heart, never thinking that this would have been the path. I very much thought I was going to go to law school or pursue and become you, Dr. Bowes. In a lot of ways, I'd never met a woman of color that commanded that intellectual space and capacity in political science. And so in a lot of ways, I was like, well, I'm going to get my PhD in political science and I'll just stay this course. Obviously, we can get into what really happened, but that's the journey of being, you know, a high school student in Hempstead that had access to an amazing university experience and then staying on. And you know, as you said, until you said it back to me, I didn't realize just how much I did as an undergrad, but to have all those opportunities afforded to you, you know, back then, I was probably one of the first people from Hofstra to get into Teach for America. And now, you know, that's a pathway that a lot of undergrads pursue when they come out of college. But the grounding and the training, it's really fortunate to reflect back on those days. But that's how I ended up at Hofstra. And I still stand by it being the best decision that I've ever made, particularly when I talk to high school students about making the choice. You can go for lots of names, you can go for, you know, even different financial aid resource packages, but you should pick a university that loves and cares for you and has a strong group of professors who are committed to that. And that's what I received at Hofstra. And it's a lot of reasons why I'm sitting here today and can't wait to come back and visit. Although I feel like a lot has changed. The last time I was home, I was like, the stadium is gone and there's a medical school. And it's amazing to see how your university grows and evolves, even as you're growing and evolving.
It does. Oh, Christina, that is just everything you've said is so beautiful. We have 3 Unispans now.
That's I know I saw 2 and I was like, this is, well, what do they call them? Is it Uni 1? So I don't know. I'm old enough to remember getting yelled at by public safety for trying to cross the highway in the middle of the night. And I'm very happy there are more bridges.
Indeed, there are. There's a whole first-year residential complex. There's the side where the medical school. It's
Fascinating. I lived in Bill of Rights, so I don't know if it's still an all-girls dorm, but that is where I lived.
don't think so, but that's the one that's closest to the student center.
Yeah,
right? It's very close. It's very convenient, right?
yes.
And
Well,
you
that was a trade. I mean, you remember my parents. I could only live on campus if I lived in the all-girls dorm, because in their mind that made sense. So that's what we went with. So
now, and this is being recorded, so they'll get a chance to
know.
hear this, whatever they. But I have actually very fond memories of you talking about your father and when you were thinking about graduate school and what kind of investment would he be making. And so I want to get to this in a minute about how you chose the Teach for America path and then from there into higher education. But I do have to say, Christina, your connection, this was evident as a student, as a peer teacher with your environment and keen kind of awareness of your audience. It's so clear. And it brings back to me, the reason I remember you being an RA is when you spoke to the American presidency class for the first time and you introduced yourself and you said, well, I'm an RA. That's like what they have on Felicity. And I remember, and of course, and it was a very direct connection that I think that is so important, especially as we look at how much education has changed today. When you were talking about going to the admissions office, of course, everything is, you can still go in person, but so much is online now. And of course, that gives us this opportunity to communicate directly, which is so much better than phone. But yet, how we navigate that in the world of education, online technology and in person is a continuing challenge, I think, at the university level, and I'm sure in the public school system as well. Could I ask you, actually, if we can maybe kind of keep going chronologically, how did you, I mean, I remember this, but I'd love to hear it in your words, how you decided on Teach for America and how that propelled your journey to pursue graduate education in graduate study in education rather than political science, because you were a rising political scientist. You did the research program, you did your honors essay. You easily could have gone in either route. And so if you could share a little bit of that, would be lovely.
Well, one, I will say to all current students listening, that the roads will all make sense over time. So we'll twist and turn, but it is 100% true. Coming out of the Ralph Bunche program, I really did think that I was going to go the distance, study political science. In fact, have a lot of friends who sit on both sides of the aisles who have degrees in political science, and I get to watch them debate each other on Fox News or MSNBC, depending on your leaning. And very much remember the moment where so many people were disappointed that, I had said I finished at Hofstra, I became a paralegal, and there were 2 paths. I was going to become a corporate attorney. Fun fact, there's another alum who's a partner at a very prestigious law firm in New York, but across the globe. I went and worked with him. And that was path 1, go to law school. To my parents, they were like, you will become a corporate attorney, you will make money, you will buy us a house. For anyone who's a first generation college grad, or if you're an immigrant to this country, at least for our lived experiences, we owe our parents a house. That is a part of the deal. And so I remember, doing that work. And the truth is, because I'd accomplished so much in undergrad, in a lot of ways, it was overwhelming to think about pursuing another 5-year degree. All the things like Phi Beta Kappa, like every box you could check, I was like, I will do all the things to make my family proud, to make my professors proud, to do everything that's expected of you. And I do speak a lot now about the weight we place on children in college, because though I accomplished a lot of things, I wish I would have studied abroad more, or had fun, or just had fun, because at this age, there are certain things I just won't ever have time to do again. But when I was working as a paralegal and trying to decide, I still was going to apply to either a poli-sci program or pursue law school. I was doing pro bono work with high school students at our firm. And so our firm is, internationally known, arguably one of the top 10 in the country. And part of our pro bono work was bringing high school students to the firm to study litigation. And then we would go up against other firms. And it was so competitive. Partners cared about it as much as they cared about the next deal or corporate transaction. And I got to lead the work. And so over time, I was billing more to my high schoolers than I was to actual clients or work. And my high schoolers were great. I mean, we would show up for litigation competitions, we would win. And I remember at the end of my first year with them, this was in 2001, and I'll get to that in a second, my students sent a note and they were like, you should be a teacher. And I thought it was comical. Like at that point in time, I had made more money than I'd ever seen. I had a great corporate little life. And I never considered becoming a teacher, but I enjoyed spending time with my students. They were really great and really smart. And then 9/11 happened. And I was going to work like I had done every single day. And, I am fortunate that I went to work and made it home. But, over 3,000 people didn't. And it was the first time I would say that I became really clear about not just succeeding, but attempting to have a purpose or have impact. Like, would I spend my career, doing very well professionally and making a lot of resources for myself? Or would I start to think deeply about what it meant to serve and be of service to others? I sat in my office one night and I knew this is very important. So I graduated in 2000. I had a limited amount of time before I had to go back to graduate school because my parents expected the next degree. So that was very clear. And they were like, are you going to law school? Are you getting a doctorate? What is happening next? Because we did not invest all of this in you to be a paralegal. And so that is very important. And I remember I sat and this is back when we had like AOL or Yahoo. And I remember I put in the search engine, I said, master's degree, New York, something, and Teach for America popped up. And at that time, that proposition made sense. Would I take 2 years and serve as a teacher? And in exchange, would I get a master's degree? And I thought that if I had 2 more years, I could, make sense of what the world meant post 9/11. Lots of health issues and in response to that. And I'd get clear. So either I'd have a master's in education and then go to law school and then, but that's how I ended up joining TFA. It was a group of high school students in New York. And as you said, I was a TFA 2003 core member. I taught in New York City and Harlem. And I still know a bunch of my students from way back then. They're adults now with children, which make me feel very old. But that's that was not a quick story, but that is the story on how I abandoned my major and then took the course. Which most folks don't know. Many people believe that TFA is a 2-year program, but over 70% of the alum are still impacting in education. And our theory of change is you can impact in the classroom, you can be a lawyer, even doctors who have done the core, they tend to serve areas where children are of high need. And you just need more people grounded in the policy arena around education. And then I chose to stay the course. Once I taught my students, it's like undergrad all over again. I was like, oh, well, now I want to be a principal and now I want to be a lobbyist. And so I've had the great fortune of sitting in lots of seats. And that is, I said, all things work together. The intersection in my training that's grounded in political science and how it intersects in education, particularly in today's context, has never been more important and more critical. And I would say, and I think others would say as well, that my bipartisan training in policy and deep understanding of the framings of this country and even presidential administrations and the way those decisions impact the education landscape that we exist in today is critical and important as I sit in the nation's capital, making decisions on behalf of our residents and their children. And I tell folks often that I'm a trained political scientist that operates in the space of education. And that's a framing that helps people understand how I think about issues, and that it's very rare that there is a yes or a no on any issue. There's always some middle ground as we're seeking to achieve a goal for a school or a school community. And the ability to do this work deeply grounded in bipartisan politics allows me to leverage this space in unique ways. And so I spent most of my career, as an educator, the teacher, the principal, the superintendent. But in the state superintendency, this is solidly a policy role. And in that role, it's critically important to deeply understand resource allocation, bipartisan politics, and have education and all of our principles overlaid on top of that decision making. So I'm sorry, that was a long answer, but that's how we got here.
Such a rich answer. And I want to get us to DC.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, from Teach for America to your doctoral study, your continued graduate studies, your second master's, doctoral degree, and then this bipartisan grounding in education. Could you tell us a little bit about how about that journey and how that brought you to the office you're in today, from New York to Philadelphia to DC?
Yeah, and in New York, because of my high school experience. So for those of you who live on Long Island, most people don't know or appreciate, especially in places like Philadelphia and DC, where you have really large school systems. I grew up in a community where we had 6 or 7 schools. We had 1 high school, we had 1 middle school. And if you didn't have access to resources to go to private school, or if you didn't get a scholarship for independent school, like that is how I ended up graduating from Hempstead High School. My parents couldn't afford to send me to private school. And so when I came into the education arena in New York, I really was someone who was focused on school choice. I wanted to make sure that families had access to the best education that they could get their children access to. For me, that meant I opened a lot of charter schools in New York City, both opening as an authorizer, but also directly opening. I've opened and operated schools in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Delaware. And in that process, really understanding soup to nuts, like, how do you design a school? What is the best instructional methods for children? How do you build community in those places and spaces so that parents will choose you to educate and love their child, which is, to me, a sacred contract. It's one of the social contracts that in this society we agree upon, that children will go to school, and in that schoolhouse, they will be educated, nurtured, they'll receive character development, but through that process, they will become citizens in this great experiment that we call American democracy. That through line in New York, again, took me in lots of places and spaces. Once founding Great Oaks, which is a charter school management organization that still exists, we opened schools across 4 different states. I had a critical question and moment in myself that had achieved a lot of success in the charter space and wondered if that success was transferable in the traditional school system. And so that is how I ended up leaving New York. At this point, I had finished Fordham and Columbia, but had wanted to see, like, could I see this success or achievement at scale in a very large, complex school system? And so the school district of Philadelphia is either the 9th or 10th largest school district in the country, enjoying their senior leadership team, living on both sides. So managing a portfolio of charter schools, but literally managing the high schools in the system that we called our innovative schools. And so got to spend time creating policy conditions for schools to exist and managing the resources allotted to those schools, but also really pressure testing. Is it the governance structure that dictates student success, or is it, which I believe, the individuals in the school, at the school level, every single day that are creating conditions for children to learn? And what are all the policy implications of those learning environments. And so it meant a lot to spend 7 years in the district, opening schools, transforming schools, navigating, again, complex political and governance issues, because one of the hottest topics in public education is the space between traditional public and public charter schools, and which governance structure allows for more autonomy, student performance, and the best usage of public funds. And that's the work that I would say I cut my teeth and built all of my political muscle in education, firmly stepping out of a school choice space into a true public policy space focused on education, school system design. And a year and a half ago, in the middle of the pandemic, got the great fortune to join Mayor Bowser and the DC public education team as our state superintendent. And I'll keep saying that, all things work together in that, this role is encompassing what we call 0 to adulthood. We support our children literally from the time that they were born through adulthood. And then we have a strong range of options for our adult learners, because in DC, we do believe the theory to a strong district, a strong city, a strong nation is in the education that residents have access to. And it's been a wild ride, but now to be in this seat, it is where my political training and leanings and understandings come into play. And I never lost my love for the presidency and presidential studies. And so I'm a presidential leadership scholar where I've had the opportunity to spend time with both former President Bush and Clinton, and lots of learning in the Johnson administration, but all through the lens of education. The same is true for the German Marshall Fund, the United States Spain Council. And so I've never left my deep love and appreciation for policy and the way that policy drives government institutions. I've been very fortunate that I get to overlay my passions for education on top of all of those studies and areas. And even through the pandemic, to speak with prime ministers in other countries or other departments of education and how everyone navigated globally this once in a lifetime event, the intersection again between political science, policy, and education show up quite profoundly in these days and times. And as we look to the future in public education, I think we're going to be in for a bumpy ride. So there's a lot going on right now.
Well, and that's going to be my next question after this one, which is, could you tell us a little bit about the presidential leadership program and how you got involved? And you've explained so cogently how political science, how it has allowed you to bridge political science, presidential studies, and public policy. If you could just tell us about the program, and then of course the bipartisanship that you've referenced earlier as well, and how that's informed your leadership.
Yeah, it's so fun talking to you because you know a lot about me. I think it's rare. Again, I grew up in a bipartisan household, and so my father was a pretty hardcore Republican, and my mother was like a bleeding blue Democrat. And as a child, I never really understood why they would argue like fiercely over certain topics. But I grew up watching presidential debates. I distinctly remember that like we would all gather around the television and, watch the country and watch all of the navigations of, I remember like the Reagan tax credit, and that's how my father got money for me to pay to go to private school. And it's so interesting now that you look back and you're like, it's interesting to grow up that way. But it played out in the work in that I always am able to deeply understand how a current issue of the day, like the evolution of that issue, how did we get to this current leaning or understanding or disposition in society on this topic, and what is it founded in? And the example that I talk with people about the most is the vaccine, and how the country responded to that. And, folks would say like, you're just so level-headed. And I was like, well, if you understand like the foundations of religion or the foundations of understanding or free choice, in this country, you could readily understand both sides of the argument without disparaging either side. And I feel like we lost a lot of ground on the process in two ways. One, I think we can all look back and say we didn't have the best national response to the pandemic. But two, when it came down to individuals making a very personal choice, instead of just leaning on like, well, let's inform individuals and let's make sure they understand their options and all, we took the route of like shaming or like, well, if you're not smart, if you don't make this choice. But as someone who grew up with, deep religious leanings, I truly could understand how on one side, someone would say, yep, I'm going to take the shot. And on another side, someone would say that they wouldn't. And then it's our role as individuals who have to craft policy to make the best decisions in support of the whole as we're navigating individuals' rights. That's what makes America unique as a country. And it's those types of understandings that I kind of navigate. The Presidential Leadership Scholars Program was created by President Clinton and President Bush 43. And it was their, they are very good friends. And so it was their collaborative effort to bring together the presidential libraries of Bush 41, Bush 43, Clinton, and Johnson, so that selected individuals across a range of professions, skills, etc., would have direct access to the presidential libraries, to their presidential administrative teams, and to the formers themselves. As we both visited their libraries, but we each had to work on a policy paper, plan, etc. I did mine on students who were incarcerated. And the goal, I think, was twofold. And then there was a third objective. One, it really was to visit presidential libraries and unpack in real time with individuals who made those decisions, the presidencies of these leaders, and not just what we saw kind of on the news, but to sit with, President Bush and unpack 9/11. Like, where were you? What did you hear? And that was a profound moment for me because, to tell the president that it was critically important for me that he came to New York and went and stood on I was physically able to get up and move when I saw that national response to New York City at arguably our most broken moment. All to things of what has served me well is having access to several secretaries of education spanning 25 years of this country as we're navigating through decisions. So on the one hand, it was visiting the libraries and getting access to their teams. On the second, it literally was building relationship across the country with individuals who are leading in places and spaces and aligning on policy initiatives. One of my colleagues is she literally is a, rocket analyst for NASA and leads space missions to the moon. And that plays out in the lives of our kids because when they have, things that they want to share with students, I'm often her first phone call. I think the third byproduct of it is so much of what you all will receive in your education at Hofstra that won't play out today, but like me will play out down the road, is a deep appreciation for public service and what it means to serve. One of the most humbling things Barbara Bush said to me before she passed was she wished that educators received the same amount of love and adoration and praise that individuals who serve in the military receive. And that if we poured that level of love and support and adoration into our educators, we probably would prevent needing more people to go into the military. And that was something that, it hit me then and it stays with me now, that the through line to the future of the American democracy, global peace, etc., is grounded in the education we receive and the ability to make strong citizens that are deep critical thinkers that can both deeply love America, of which I do, but also critique the country and push it forward. That's why our Constitution is so special. That's why the construct of our country by design is special, and that we are not supposed to stay stagnant. And even when we're living in really, really harsh times, the country is designed to swing as a pendulum And it's folks like myself and Dr. Bose and even you that are responsible for ensuring that we don't swing so far that we lose the ground that we've covered in this, I always call it this great experiment called America, because we're still a relatively young country, even though we've achieved a lot as a society.
You know,
You would give me my degree again, wouldn't you?
100%. We not only that, Dr. Grant, Christina, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking how much I would love to teach a seminar with you on American politics.
Sign
and the
me
state
up.
of America. I think we need to explore that. And, Zoom may make that possible. Zoom and your family. So
Yeah,
come back
yeah.
next. Well, that actually, and we will talk about that for sure. But let me ask now, in your current role in Washington, D.C., right, in the nation's capital, overseeing the education system, can you tell us a little bit about what you consider to be the future of public education in the 21st century, particularly in DC and nationally, particularly given your wide-ranging expertise in charter schools, in public schools, in studying American politics and the presidential leadership experiences. You've had such a rich and deep educational and professional background that I think your position is one that is really, highly significant for kind of seeing, as we look ahead to the next few years, the next decade, what will public education be?
Well, I mean, if you Google these days, it'll be what we make it. We are still very fortunate to have a United States Department of Education, but again, if you study presidencies and presidential administrations, there's always a shift in how much government should be involved in our education system at a national level or how much should live at the state level. It's important to note that Washington, D.C. is not a state. And so taxation without representation is very deep and profound to us. And that became clear. This is the first place I've lived that has not been a state. And the intersections of how that plays out in our day-to-day life are very real. But when I think about the future of public education, it's watching the news right now. We are solidly shifting back to a place where more states are demanding for more direct rights over what's taught and provided access to in their school systems. You should track the wave of what's happening at school boards across the country. School boards have a tremendous amount of power over what takes place in the local jurisdiction's school system in the classroom. And so, if you ever want to get started in policy and education, run for a school board seat. It will give you a crash course into what takes place in a school system. And I'd say twofold. I'd say on the pandemic, it has taught us more about the ways that technology should be leveraged to foster student learning. This same pandemic happening 50 years ago, recovery would look so different because at least we were able to ensure children had devices and we could stand up virtual learning. And even though learning environments shifted depending on what students had access to, we know for certain that by and large, children were able to learn from home. And now we are assessing our children and we're focused on accelerated learning and getting our systems reopened. And here in DC, we are quite proud that we reopened our school system. We have increased enrollment, and data is showing that our families are pleased to have their children back in school, but that the results of the pandemic, we have a clear path on how we accelerate and move past what we will all know as this historic event. But the other part around virtual learning, data showed us that high school students can achieve more and faster, and they don't necessarily need teaching and learning to look the way it's always looked and sound at the high school level. And so we're going through a process now of reimagining high school and not having school be the center of what happens in a student's life, but having education options be the center so that students can learn in different modalities in different places. And you all will hear there are all new advancements in AI and features and programs that allow AI to write papers, which I would love to hear how professors feel about that. And isn't it, to me, it feels like it felt when the internet started, like professors were upset that you didn't have to go to the library anymore. And now, I mean, I wrote an entire dissertation while my university library was closed because we were able to access not just Penn's library, but several others virtually. And so technology and everything we learned from the pandemic is going to push us forward. And that's one future advancement in education that I'm excited about. I wonder how that will play out in like the future of higher education, and what does a BA credential mean? And how do we ensure that there's high value in what we are experiencing, the richness of what occurs when people come into community with each other and learn, versus being solely dependent on technology, because there is socialization that occurs across learning that's critically important. And one of the things we're seeing in our system, and you're seeing across the country, is students were in kindergarten and then they returned to school and they were in second grade, or they were in third grade. And like those missed social milestones matter. When you left school in middle school and you returned as a high school student, you missed all of the things. Go back to middle school and high school. All of those things matter when we meet that student again in 9th or 10th grade, and we expect them to function as a 9th or 10th grader, not just cognitively, but in their behavior expectations. But they didn't have those behavioral milestones take place in a school community. Those are the things we're seeing. I think on the opposite side really is a policy conversation around the roles that states will have. Individuals like myself, there are only 58 commissioners of education across the country. And so depending on jurisdiction, we have different titles. My neighbor to the north in Maryland is called state superintendent, like myself. My neighbor to the south in Virginia is called secretary of education. In New York, where you all are, that person is called the commissioner of education. And the 58 of us really do serve either at the pleasure of our governor or our board of education, or like myself, the mayor, in charting out what the education policy will be for our jurisdiction. That tension between federal oversight and states' rights, that is playing out in real time. And so again, if you look at states like Florida or states like Mississippi, their governors are taking really aggressive stance into their education system. And then in other jurisdictions like DC, we are a very progressive district. We are embarking on endeavors like changing our social studies standards for the first time in 20 years. Those tweaks to policy as it plays out in the classroom, not only does it make national news, but they are markers that our education system is shifting. And because we are one United States of America, the long-term ramifications of those shifts will play out as those students become adults and navigate throughout the country and then amongst each other. It's critically important to me and lots of my other colleagues that a child being educated in New York is receiving the same education with the same quality and the same rigor as a child being educated right here in Washington, D.C. Because when both those children meet each other on Hofstra University's campus in their freshman year, not only should they be able to engage critically, but they should have had access to the foundational learning so that they can compete. And all of that plays out into college persistence, who is able to chart their own career once they graduate, and then how do they give back to this thing we call democracy, or what it means to be a good citizen. And so that's what's top of mind over here. And just making sure every single day we're doing what's right for our kiddos, the 700,000 residents that we serve. And we have 96,000 children in our public and public charter system, and then a whole ecosystem of private schools and higher university partners like Georgetown and places that I did not go to school. But that's the work. And I'd say what keeps me up at night is still recovering from the pandemic. Like, we have yet to see what I would say are the manifestations of the social and emotional impact of the pandemic. I think we are just starting to say out loud that, we all might not be okay. And to your point, Dr. Bose, this tension we have now between virtual learning showing us what is possible. We can be here today engaged in a conversation over Zoom, but what so many of us know, like to hear you speak about my experiences at Hofstra, none of that's possible virtually. And so I think those are the tensions that we find ourselves in now, as we think about what the future of education would be. I think what's most important is making sure that our citizens, our students are ready to become citizens and however they define. I think in my generation, everyone said like, you must go to college. Today, we say that we want our students to be able to explore whatever post-secondary option is of their choice. If they decide to join the workforce, how are they joining the workforce in high wage, high skill careers that can allow them to afford a life and a family? If they pursue college options, how are we ensuring that they're pursuing college options very much like what Hofstra was for me, a strong university with a lot of resources and support so that my university experience bears fruit in my life? Or if our children decide to join the military, they're best positioned to serve this country with distinction. That's a huge shift from being able to say, well, everyone needs to go to college. Everyone needs to be able to thrive and contribute back to our country in the way that makes sense for them.
That is a big paradigm shift. As you're saying that, I'm just thinking from what your experience was as a college student in the 1990s to where we are in 2023. I am so disappointed. My only disappointment today is that our students cannot ask you questions directly. They're going to be coming up. I know I'm mindful of your time. And so I'll leave the comments about Chat GPT for another conversation. And we will talk about teaching together, which I would like to see that happen. But may I ask you in closing, Dr. Graham, what advice would you offer to Hofstra undergraduates today from your perspective as an alum and as an educator and a leader who supervises staff, interns? What advice would you give for students who seek to pursue a career in political science, education policy, African American studies, public service more broadly? From your vast expertise, what concluding thoughts would you leave them?
That's such a big question.
I know.
I'd start by saying, right now we don't talk enough about what it means to be in public service. In fact, because of Instagram and social media, the focus is always like, well, I'm going to make money, and that you don't hear a lot of good government bureaucrats saying like, join us. And so, one reason why I was so delighted to speak with you all today is to literally put a face on what 20 years of public service looks like and sounds like. Speaking to other first generation college grads, one of the reasons why my family was so focused on me going to law school or, going into the workforce is because they really were concerned about resources. And so we do need to start saying that you can both do good in public service and do well in public service, that you can run this race, serve communities well, and also be in a position to, create generational wealth and take care of your family and things along that nature. And then I'd also say, I was so fortunate, and I mean this not just because you are here, but I was so fortunate to have you and other professors who literally pushed me to do things that I could not even conceive of. Like, I think of Model UN and the Ralph Bunche Fellowship. Like, I had never gotten on a plane until I turned 18. And so to come to Hofstra's campus and to meet presidents and to be pushed into, like, I would tell everyone, be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And I'd close in saying that, in this current space in society where it feels like we are being pulled further apart, I would encourage you aggressively to use this time as political science students at Hofstra to be uncomfortable and to engage in difficult conversations and to step outside of your comfort zone. I took a joint course in religion and political science at Hofstra called Blacks and Jews. That literally was the name of the course. Not even sure you could call it that today, but for a whole entire semester, read sacred texts from African American studies, and then read sacred texts that unpacked Judaism and the Jewish people in their faith. And on the campus of Hofstra University, came to understand in pretty profound ways just how much more together we could and should be than further apart. And those experiences stuck with me and remain with me. And so I would close in saying, consider public service. We need you. And use this time to say yes to everything, become uncomfortable, and push yourself past what you see on the news or what you might see on a social media platform, to go to that neighbor and say, like, well, tell me your experience, and then listen. Because there's so much that makes the country great, and so much of it is sitting on the university's campus right now. And so that would be my closing message, that the university grew me as a person. I don't often go into places and spaces and say, like, well, I'm an African-American woman, because you can see that, but there's so much more beyond what you can see. And that's the space that, particularly as political scientists, we sign up to do the work beyond what we can see. And the telling of those stories is critically important. So that's what I would offer you with. I have an entire team of people outside my door ready to do hearing prep, but this has been just tremendous. And I really cannot wait to come to campus and visit with you.
Well, Dr. Grant, this has truly been an inspirational conversation. It is, I just can't tell you personally how much this means, and professionally, from that you've taken the time to share your journey with us. We can't wait to continue the conversation in person. But for now, I'm just personally just in awe of all that you have done, and so grateful and so happy to speak with you, and so happy to see all that you're doing. You give us real hope for the future, and so in education and public service and political science. So thank you for taking the time today.